welcome back. We're doing another edition of Tillis Mistakes, and this time we're going to be taking a look at a game from 2005 in Atlanta at the Emory Castle Grand Prix. It was one of my first times in Atlanta. It's kind of a neat background. You can look at my tournament history and see that I started playing chess in February of 2003 and went to the tournament and played in the Castle Grand Prix. I believe 2004 was the first year I competed in that, and then heard about the camp and liked it so much I got involved in it. And I've missed pretty much only 1 year since then, either as a camper, a counselor, and then the last few years an instructor. And I gotta say, there's something for a place that makes you feel good and makes you feel good about your game. And I believe this was my first year as a camper, 2005. And I learned so many lessons just from being around strong chess players and seeing their methods. It was the first time I ever saw ChessBase being used. First thing I did when I got home from camp was started using ChessBase. And I don't think it can be overstated the importance of, if you want to be good at chess, you need to be around the strongest players you can possibly be around on a regular basis. You're going to pick things up intuitively that you need to be doing. In this particular game, I learned a huge lesson, and it was interesting because I remember saying what happened to one of the instructors at the time, International Master Schroer, and he said to me, well, we'll get back to that. So let's go ahead with the moves now. Let's get to this key point in the game after a little bit of talking about the opening and whatnot. Tournament rules, very important to know, understand, and apply. So we have ourselves a Sicilian, and I was playing black in this game. And in this time period, I was dabbling with the Sveshnikov Sicilian. And honestly, I don't know why I was playing the opening. It was just something that I was interested in. It was a bit different. So I thought, why not? Let's go ahead and dive right in. And it was kind of my mentality with openings when I was younger, that pretty much I would play one tournament a month, and I would come in and play different openings probably every other tournament. And to this day, I'm still pretty flexible with my openings. So after knight db5, it's pretty noticeable that white would like to drop into d6, and I'm going to have to take, giving up the bishop pair. So d6 needs to be played. And there's multiple moves. Knight d5 gained a huge amount of popularity after the Carlsen Caruana World Championship. But bishop g5 is the classical main line. And we take the time to play a6. And here's the branch. Knight a3, which was played in the game, or bishop takes, where if you take with a queen, knight c7 is going to give some problems. So takes. And b5, threatening b4. White gets this nice outpost on d5. And the Sveshnikov is characterized by white wants this outpost forever. White doesn't want to have to take back with a pawn, and he wants to keep trading so that in the long term, this pawn will be weak, and say, for instance, he's able to put pressure on it. So black needs to do everything he can to keep tension and not allow a scenario that reaches, say, a position where we took all the minor pieces off the board. That is going to be difficult for black. So f5, trying to chip away at that d5's knight's support. Bishop d3 and bishop e6. And this is a normal position in the Sveshnikov. So coming back to the main game, knight a3 was played, and we have the same thing, b5 threatening b4, knight d5. Now bishop e7 breaking the pin. No need to double pawns unless you have to there. And Bishop g5 is the secondary move, but I still like it. I think it's best because you're preserving the bishop pair here. And something can be said for the bishop's in an open position. It's dynamic, it's interesting. Let's keep it going. So knight c2, logical move where the knight can come to e3 or b4 at the right moment to support his twin. And my opponent makes like a 8th choice move or something here. Bishop d3 just really, it's a combination of lines, but it doesn't do it justice. The first choice is a4, and you have to know how to handle this pawn structure. I mean, you can't play b4, and if you sit, it gets even weaker. So it's normally unintuitive to give yourself an isolated a pawn. But after a5, we'll see bishop c4, rook b8. We let the knight sit on c6 because you can't easily get rid of it. And the a pawn actually restrains the b and c pawns from white from getting a lot of activity. So king h8, a move just to get off that g8, a2 diagonal that the white bishop on c4 is sitting on. And you're preparing, after castles, to play f5. And this score is about 50%. A very dynamic position. Both sides are really getting what they want here. So coming back to the main game with bishop d3, I understand the importance of the d5 square. So I ask him what's going on here, give him the what for. Knight cb4, good move. And here, this was my 1600 showing. Because as soon as I saw this position now, I mean, my first thought was, okay, what about a5 and get some dynamic play? And as I check the database, I find that like the line that I initially was looking at first choice, bishop e6 and b4, getting this minority attack style play. The queen's on a great square. We're eyeing d5. We've got the bishop pair. Shirov actually played this with black and was slightly better in this position, but somehow went on to lose this in also 2005. So kind of interesting, but coming back, I released tension too quickly and just helped white with his development there. Unnecessary. Bishop e6, keeping an eye on the knight, and here again, I know that it's better to have that pawn on d5 because it protects my d6 pawn. So I clip here. But if you're trying to win these games, you have to keep imbalances. And as we'll see in this upcoming endgame, bishop of opposite color can go wrong for even a player that's, 1800 strength, a pawn up. So g6 would have been a move that makes a lot more sense because we're preparing f5 and we're preparing to undermine that knight on d5. And f5 is the standard counterplay in this pawn structure for the Sveshnikov. But I took. And then this is the interesting moment because I know that the natural move is f5. So I pick up my f-pawn and put it on f5. And then I realize that I'm just dropping a pawn for no reason. And I have this like, and I let go of the pawn and I'm just, you have that moment where you're disgusted with yourself. Well, this is a key lesson, and coming back to what I am Schroer said, he was like, well, why didn't you just move the pawn to f6? Because you had the option here. One, it's knowing the tournament rules. Yeah, touch move. You can move it anywhere legally as long as you haven't let it go, that it can go. And you could put the pawn on f6. So, I mean, for instance, if f6 and it happened, I mean, I'm really not getting punished here. It's still roughly the same as it was before I touched the f-pawn. Not as favorable, of course, but still roughly equal. So it's really a lesson of, to me, I became a tournament director, and now I'm a senior TD and a national arbiter with a few norms, almost a FIDE arbiter. And I've taken quite a few tests. I've directed many tournaments, including the Florida State Championship. And I got to say that knowing the rules has helped in so many situations. So I feel that any competent tournament player, if you want to be really good, you need to know every angle about the game that we're playing. So I strongly recommend becoming a tournament director and studying the rules. And I do have a YouTube video covering all of the essential rules that I believe chess players need to know on the Palm Beach Chess YouTube channel. So definitely take a look at that if you don't feel confident in your knowledge of rules. Because here, had I just taken the moment, not been like, oh, I'm blundering, I would have taken the time to play f6. And for some reason, I didn't that day. Maybe it was young or inexperienced. I'm not quite sure, but f5 should be something that never happens. It was an impulse buy. So after f5, the game still is kind of interesting, but that's the main moment in the motivation for this game is this understanding the rules. And even when you make a mistake, you've got to stop yourself and you've got to try to make the most of the situation. So let's see how I recovered here. Say, okay, king h8. I've got the idea that maybe I can get g6 here and, work the pin, but he threatens mate. Very easy to be like, okay, I wanted to play g6, but then he takes it and then you're lost. So bishop h6, queen g5, hitting the bishop. Now, it's one of those situations when we get here, I've been able to get some counterplay and, things are happening. Queen d3, he covers everything. So now we've made it to a bishop of opposite color in game, and it's a pawn. This should be enough for white to win, in my opinion, just looking at the position now. And we'll see that with natural normal moves, a4, good move. Rook c5, I need to hit weaknesses as well. So a takes b5 would have been much better for my opponent. And then bishop e4, I need to jettison that pawn for play, which I don't know if I would have found at the time. And rook d8, and this is just like a passive position forever for black. And I'm not sure that black can achieve full equality. So he played bishop e4 immediately. I get in that key b4 move. And though that a pawn is a runner, my bishop is still pretty strong. And here I should definitely play takes, go g6 to get some luft, and then e4. And as an example line, this rook f4 in order to watch the a pawn. You can see how, white has the extra pawn, but this looks quite holdable for black, especially if I can get my rook to a1. Say rook c1, rook a1. He can't push the pawn to a5 as the bishop and the rook are watching it. So coming back, rook fb1, bishop c3, takes, bishop d4, and this keeps an eye on f2 and also keeps an eye on a7. So it's going to be very difficult for the rook to find a square. And after rook b8, white has to be careful because there's some back rank problems. So rook b2 hits the f pawn, and I know as soon as I get the rooks off the board that this should be holdable for me as long as my king can get over. And now here is a good moment of comparison as well. I need my king to run over to basically play blocker for wherever white's king goes. But this moment is pretty key because in order to move the king, we're going to have to defend that h7 pawn because we don't want to lose it for no reason. So in the game, I played g6, but this is terrible technique because it secures the pawns on the color of the bishop. h6 makes it where they can't be attacked. And then we'll see with this line, it's really nothing doing. The white king can't get in, and we can just play blocker. But it is still a position that only white can win. So coming back here, after king f1, I played g6. And my opponent misses the opportunity to win around here. Yeah, it's this moment. So he plays f3. but it just shows how critical this position is. G4 starts to get space. That gets one pawn off. That gets another pawn off the color of the bishop. And the fact that he can give this pawn, it just shows that the white king is much faster. And the white bishop is making sure the e-pawn doesn't become a runner. So, I mean, this is... Now you sack the b, the king comes back, everything falls, and white wins. So king g8, f3 gives me just enough time as he's messing around here to get my pawns off of the light squares onto the dark squares where they're safe. And this was white's last moment to make something of the position. And this is another critical moment in understanding for pawn endgames, or just endgames in general. If you're trying to win, you typically want to preserve pawns. Because in this case, if you take, this pawn is always going to be easy to be defended by the bishop. As long as when the king moves to try to go after it, all right, well, the bishop is going to be able to cover that pawn, the king's going to be able to cover that pawn. And it could do a little bit of a topsy-turvy, but I mean, you're holding here. You want to play h5. And that makes it to where this bishop is not going to be able to cover that pawn unless he's here or here. And I don't see that happening with this pawn still as a looming threat. So I feel like h5 gives a good amount of winning chances for white in the position. But h takes g5, you can agree to a draw here. There is absolutely nothing to do, as we'll see, as now the black king has made it just in time. So that if the a pawn moves, king b7, which happened in the game, and after bishop takes a7, we agree to a draw because there's nothing to play for here for either player. So overall takeaways from the game: one, we have ourselves a Sveshnikov Sicilian. It may be an opening that some of you might be interested in. Two, we have tournament rules and psychology of competition within the game. You got to be in the moment when you're playing. You can't have distractions, you can't think about other things, and you can't let emotions cloud your judgment when you know that a mistake's been made. You have to be as objective as possible in order to play high-level chess. So, hopefully you enjoyed another lesson of Tillis Mistakes.